The shadow of MetLife Stadium stretched across the New Jersey marshes like a slumbering giant, its massive steel skeleton now draped in shimmering glass. The surrounding marshes, usually a place of quiet decay, were now alive with the hum of the city and the blinding glare of high-intensity stadium lights that could be seen from the Manhattan skyline. By the summer of 2026, this colossus was no longer just a sports venue. It was the crown jewel of the FIFA World Cup, a monument to ambition prepared for the final. Walking through the empty, echoing corridors was Elias Thorne, a veteran structural inspector with silvering hair. Elias was a man built on integrity, seeking redemption for safety failures that had haunted his early career. He had spent decades ensuring the ground never betrayed those above it, but he felt the weight of every beam in this new structure. The world marveled at the speed of construction, a 3-year miracle heralded as a triumph. His former mentor, Commissioner Marcus Vane, had publicly called this renovation the peak of Elias's career. But the numbers in the system told a different story. Global excitement was palpable as millions of fans descended upon the cities. Yet, as Elias sat in his cramped office, lit only by the sterile glow of a tablet, the numbers refused to align. He reviewed the foundation logs, comparing them with official records. A discrepancy in the load-bearing data for the northern pillars haunted the files, suggesting corners were cut and safety margins ignored. It was a phantom buried beneath tons of fresh concrete. This nagging doubt was worsened by a heavy silence. Elias's predecessor and closest friend Sarah had overseen the initial pouring of those foundations. She was meticulous, yet she had vanished weeks before completion. The official report dismissed it as a stress-related disappearance brought on by crushing deadlines. Elias knew better. Sarah wouldn't leave a job unfinished or vanish without a word. Guilt gnawed at him. He should have listened to her final, frantic voicemails about shifting shadows in the lower levels. Driven by duty and a growing dread, Elias waited until the midnight shift changed to move. He took the service stairs deep into the facility toward Sector 4, the dark heart where massive pillars met the earth. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The air down here was thick with the scent of damp earth and curing chemicals, a sharp contrast to the pristine luxury far above. Navigating the sub-basement, his flashlight caught a security patrol. These were men from the Aegis Group, a firm known for cold efficiency. The Aegis Group enforcers wore matte black tactical gear, their faces obscured by polarized visors that reflected the flickering overhead service lights. They had been hired to guard the lower levels, ostensibly to protect against sabotage, but their presence felt like an occupation. Elias pressed into an alcove, his heart hammering as the rhythmic thud of boots passed just inches away. Their flashlights cut through the gloom like searchlights. They weren't looking for intruders. They were guarding a secret. Once the silence returned, Elias pressed on, reaching the ventilation grate Sarah had mentioned. His fingers fumbled with the screws until the panel came loose. Tucked inside was a small digital recorder. His hands trembled as he pressed play. At first there was only the low hum of machinery. Then, Sarah's voice broke through the static, breathless and terrified, whispering about foundations built on lies. Suddenly, the audio was pierced by heavy footsteps and a metallic clang. The recording ended not with words, but with a blood-curdling scream that was abruptly cut short by the sickening, heavy thud of wet concrete being poured from a massive height. The sound of the scream echoed in his ears long after the recorder fell silent. He touched the cold surface of the pillar, feeling the vibration of the stadium above him. Elias stared at the wall before him, the realization chilling his blood. Sarah wasn't gone. She was part of the very structure he was sent to inspect, buried in the dark. The silence in Sector 4 felt heavy, thick with the phantom echoes of the scream that had just played through the digital recorder. Elias Thorne stood frozen in the dim, flickering light of the service tunnel, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew he couldn't stay. The rhythmic thud of the Aegis Group enforcers' boots was already echoing through the ventilation shafts in the distance. Sliding the recorder into his jacket, he slipped through a side maintenance hatch, disappearing into the dark labyrinth of the stadium's plumbing network. He eventually retreated to a small, nondescript apartment on the edge of the city. a place where the shimmering lights of the new MetLife Stadium were nothing more than a distant, mocking glow on the horizon. Once safe behind a bolted door, Elias connected the recorder to his laptop, his fingers trembling as he bypassed the encryption Sarah had set. What he found was more than a confession. It was a digital map of corporate greed. Sarah's logs detailed how the construction conglomerate had discovered an undocumented industrial dumping ground directly beneath the site, a graveyard of mercury, lead, and volatile chemicals. Instead of performing the billion-dollar cleanup required by law, they had buried the poison under a layer of unproven, experimental polymer foundation. The savings were astronomical, but the cost was buried in the dirt. The very earth was a ticking time bomb of toxicity, hidden beneath the glamour of the upcoming world event. Desperate for an ally, Elias turned to Commissioner Marcus Vane, his mentor of 30 years. They met in a quiet, rain-slicked park, the stadium's silhouette looming over them like a giant tombstone. Elias laid out the digital evidence, expecting the man who had taught him the value of structural integrity to be horrified. Instead, Vane's face remained a mask of cold, bureaucratic steel. The betrayal was swift and agonizing. Vane didn't deny the findings. He justified them. He revealed that he sat on the board of the very conglomerate responsible for the cover-up. He spoke of economic rebirth and the prestige of the nation, his voice devoid of the warmth Elias had trusted for decades. Vane offered a choice: a comfortable, quiet retirement, or the complete destruction of Elias's reputation and legacy. As Elias walked away into the cold night, the memories of his own past failures flooded back. He saw the twisted metal of a Jersey overpass from a decade ago, a project where he had missed the signs of stress fatigue. 3 lives had been lost that day, and while the courts had eventually cleared him, his conscience never had. This was his chance at redemption, a final chance to stop the cycle of negligence that had defined his darkest hours. Sarah's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a call to action that he could not ignore, regardless of the personal cost or the powerful men standing in his way. Returning to his analysis of the stolen technical logs, Elias discovered something even more terrifying. The experimental foundation material wasn't just hiding the toxic waste, it was reacting with it. The chemical cocktail in the soil was slowly eating away at the polymer binder, creating millions of invisible microfractures that were spiderwebbing through the primary load-bearing pillars of Sector 4. To the naked eye, the stadium looked like a marvel of modern engineering, but internally, the structure was becoming as brittle as glass under the immense pressure of the stands. The Aegis Group soon moved from observation to open warfare. The psychological campaign began with a candid photo of Elias's daughter left on his car windshield. Then came the professional smear. Forged documents surfaced online, framing Elias for accepting kickbacks during the stadium's early renovation phase. They were systematically turning him into a pariah, ensuring that even if he spoke the truth, the world would see him as nothing more than a corrupt and disgruntled inspector. But the final revelation came when Elias accessed a hidden subdirectory in the project's main server. It was a demolition calculation disguised as a routine maintenance report. The conglomerate knew the stadium was failing and were intentionally timing the collapse for the peak vibration of the World Cup final. A catastrophic accident would trigger a massive insurance payout and allow for a complete citywide redevelopment project, erasing all evidence of the toxic site forever. The 80,000 fans in the stands weren't spectators. They were merely collateral for a corporate rebirth. Elias realized that the clock wasn't just ticking for him, but for everyone who would step into that stadium on the day of the final. The day of the final dawned with a suffocating heat that matched the electric tension vibrating through the air. Outside the MetLife Stadium, the world was a sea of flags and chanting fans, oblivious to the graveyard beneath them. Elias Thorne watched from a service entrance, his face obscured by a maintenance cap. Billions were tuning in to witness history, but Elias was there to ensure history didn't end in a massacre. He moved with practiced stealth, bypassing the stadium's perimeter scanners by using a cloned access card. Deep in the bowels of the stadium, the roar of the crowd sounded like a distant, hungry beast. The vibrations were already intensifying, the rhythmic stomping of 80,000 pairs of feet sending tremors through the micro-fractured pillars. Elias reached the primary pressure point in Sector 4, his bag heavy with stabilization clamps and a portable uplink. But the darkness of the service tunnel wasn't empty. A flashlight beam cut through the gloom, pinning him against a load-bearing wall. It was the lead enforcer of the Aegis Group, a mountain of a man sent by Marcus Vane. The confrontation was short and brutal. Elias, fueled by a decade of regret and the memory of Sarah, fought with a desperation that bypassed his age. He used the enforcer's own momentum, slamming the man into a high-voltage panel. As the enforcer slumped to the floor, Elias didn't wait. He scrambled toward the main broadcast terminal. He knew he couldn't stop the microfractures alone, but he could stop the game. With trembling fingers, he connected his digital recorder and the stolen conglomerate files to the stadium's main relay. High above, as the players prepared for the kickoff, the massive Jumbotron didn't show the pitch. Instead, it flickered to a series of internal memos, architectural scans of the crumbling pillars, and the haunting audio of Sarah's last moments. The stadium fell into a deafening silence that was soon replaced by the shrill wail of emergency sirens. Elias watched the feed on his handheld device, seeing the confusion turn to panic as the authorities were forced to acknowledge the danger in real time. The truth was finally out. But the danger was accelerating. The panic vibrations triggered rapid structural fractures. A primary coolant line, weakened by the toxic soil, burst nearby, flooding the sub-basement with a slurry of water and hazardous waste. Elias realized the primary pressure release valve for the foundation's hydraulic stabilizers had jammed. He had to manually override it before the pillar snapped. He plunged into the waist-deep, acrid water, the chemicals stinging his skin and lungs. He reached the valve, gasping for air as the ceiling groaned above him. With a final, agonizing heave, he wrenched the rusted wheel open. The roar of escaping pressure drowned out the sound of the world above, stabilizing the core just long enough for the final spectators to reach the parking lots. The evacuation was a success. No lives were lost that day, though the World Cup final was postponed indefinitely. The scandal that followed tore through the construction conglomerate and Marcus Vane's career like a wildfire. Elias was pulled from the flooding basement by emergency teams, barely conscious and suffering from severe chemical exposure. In the months that followed, he found himself in a courtroom, not as a hero, but as a defendant. Saving lives didn't excuse his federal felonies. Yet, as he stood before the judge, he felt a profound peace he hadn't known since the overpass collapse. A year later, Elias stood on a grassy knoll overlooking the New Jersey marshlands. Where the stadium once stood was now a cleanup site and a plaque. It bore only one name, Sarah. The world finally knew the true cost of corporate perfection, and Elias had finally found the redemption he had sought so desperately in the dark. He watched the demolition crews slowly level the last of the toxic pillars, knowing that this time, the truth was the only thing left in the dirt.